Number 1. Cave. I can't say that I really enjoyed going out and exploring the countryside, but it is something that I did a whole lot when I was younger. I think mostly because living out in the country, there wasn't a whole lot else to do. My family never had cable back then, because this happened so long ago, and it wasn't available in a rural area. Other than that, we lived far enough away from any of my friends or my relatives to spend time with them and do things. So a lot of my free time, especially in the summer, was spent exploring the countryside. I didn't know a lot about the history of the area that we lived in, and this was before it was easy to just look these things up on the internet, so I never knew if I would find anything interesting or noteworthy out there. I always thought it would be cool to come across an Indian arrowhead or something like that. And like every single kid in the world who goes out exploring in the country, I also hoped that I could find something valuable out there. I mean, who knew if there was gold out there somewhere? Anyway, this one day, this one summer, I was really bored and I went off exploring. I tried heading off in a direction that I hadn't really gone in before. I had avoided it because my dad told me to avoid it. It was private property, and the man who owned it got very angry if he caught anyone out there. Plus, he claimed that there were mines out there, and if I accidentally fell into one of them, it might be the last time anyone ever saw me alive. I went off in that direction, only slightly worried that I might fall into a mine. I guess the slight fear of that made the hike a little more interesting, but other than that, it was kind of fun, thinking about the possibility of getting caught, too. I don't know how long I had been out, and how many hills I had crossed over. But eventually, being on one side of a certain hill, I looked over at a hill that was facing it, and I saw, about 3/4 up the hill, what looked like either a cave or a mine in the side of the hill. I assumed, because of where it was, that it was more likely a cave. Plus, it didn't look like it would be that easy to climb, but it was interesting to me, and I decided to go and check it out. Getting to the opening was not easy. The hill was a whole lot steeper than the other ones that I had had experience with. But after quite an effort, including grabbing onto trees that had thorns and caused my hand to bleed a little, I was finally able to make it up the steep hill and to the opening of the cave. I was actually a little apprehensive right away. This was the first such cave that I had ever come across, despite all the time that I spent out exploring. The cave was of course very, very dark, and I had only brought a really small flashlight along with me. I hadn't expected to come across a cave, or to be out after dark. It was only one of those pen flashlights that I always had with me in my backpack. It was a little damp inside the cave, but that didn't bother me so much. It was easy enough to avoid stepping into water. Mostly I was worried about the possibility of disturbing bats. We didn't have as good an understanding about bats back then as we do nowadays. We thought that all bats bit, and that they all carried rabies. It was bright enough at the beginning. As I made my way into the cave, I took out my pen light in case I would need it. Of course, the first thing I did was look at the ceiling to see if there were any bats in there. Fortunately, at least in the concern for my feelings, I was happy to not see any in there. I probably would have run out of the cave and tumbled down the hill if I had even seen one of them. As I kept walking further into the cave, the light I got from the outside was nearly gone, and soon it was completely gone. I suppose that I should have headed back when it got like this, but I was way too captured by the curiosity of it all. Although I was sure that it was a cave, it had wooden beams in it that looked like they were made to reinforce the structure of the cave. So perhaps people had mined in the cave before. I mean, I don't know enough about the differences between caves and mines to really know. The weirdest part at this point were the echoes. My footfalls would sound like the footfalls of other people. A couple times I jumped, thinking that I heard someone following me, but I was able to calm down after each try. I noticed something up ahead. It looked like something was lying on the ground, up against the wall of the cave. It was too hard to make it out at first, being that I just had the small light. However, as I got closer, I noticed something that sticks with me to this very day. There were bones in the cave, and although it was not a complete skeleton, I was able to tell it was a human skeleton because there was a skull there. It was the first time I'd ever seen anything like that before, and it truly scared me. However, I also knew that the bones had to have been there for a very long time, and whatever killed this person couldn't be a danger to me. And then I heard it. It sounded like someone whispering further down in the cave. I wasn't sure I heard correctly at first, but when I froze and I did my best to listen, I heard it again. There was absolutely someone whispering deeper in the cave, and it echoed up to me. I couldn't make out what was being said, but it was definitely a human voice, and that was even scarier to me than finding the skull. I got up and tried my best to hurry up out of the cave. I heard the whispering several more times as I made my way back towards the entrance. While I wasn't scared before going into the cave with the meager light, I was scared coming out of it. However, I didn't want to run and make too much noise. If someone was deeper in the cave, I didn't want them to know that I was there. After I made it out of the cave, however, I ran down the hill. I was very lucky to not fall down and hurt myself, since the hill was so steep. I don't know what could have been making those whispering sounds, but I never went back to find out. Number 2. Creek. I had this really weird thing happen a few decades ago during the summer. Around the time we lived in this beautiful house out in the country, my older brother and my stepmom's younger brother, who was about my age, would take turns hanging out at each other's houses. I personally didn't like hanging out at her brother's house because it was in Wheeling, West Virginia, and I wasn't really a big fan of that town. But on the weekends that he would come over to our place, we almost always went on a hike in the surrounding area. And there was tons of countryside that we could explore. My brother and Pete, my stepmother's brother, were always out doing stupid things though. I mean, like really, really stupid things. Here are just a couple of examples. Once my brother wondered what it would feel like to pee on an electric fence. And yes, he really did it. Also once, at the top of a hill, there was a circular roll of hay. They decided to unravel it and roll it down the hill. Every single cow that was grazing on that hill went running for the hay. We once came across a huge bulldozer sitting on top of the hill. They wanted to climb into the cab and mess with the gears, but fortunately I was able to talk them out of it. But one of the dumbest things I recall was when they took a rock and threw it at a bull's balls. Fortunately, when I found out they were trying to do something so stupid, I made my way up a tree before it happened. Even more fortunately for them, they were able to get up a tree before they got gored to death. So every time that we went out on one of our little hikes, I kept expecting them to do something really stupid. But honestly, the most memorable hike that we ever did didn't involve those two doing something stupid. We had some frozen pizzas and watched some videos the night before, so we were really looking forward to doing something different on this day, so we went out. And we lived really way out in the country. I mean, it took nearly an hour and a half to drive into the nearest town from where we are. The houses that were out there were very few and far from each other. In fact, on the hill that we lived on, we were probably the first house up there. And going even further down the roads, it was probably a 20-minute drive to the very next house. We didn't know anybody in the area, plus every single time that we went out for an adventure, we never came across other people. We never came across other hikers. We never came across other houses. There were plenty of electric and barbed wire fences and animals, but no people to speak of. On this particular day, we ended up spending a lot of time outside. I brought along a thermos of the worst Kool-Aid flavor of all time, lemon lime. Whenever I tell this story, I can still taste that crap. We had been out for a really long time, walking across a few streams and climbing up and down hills. What was strange about this day was that we were out a lot longer than we usually were. Even when we ran out of stuff to drink, we just started drinking water from the streams and the creeks. It was when I was getting a sip of water from the creek when Pete came running up behind my brother and me. "Hey guys," he said, "you gotta see this. You won't believe it." He was speaking in whispered but excited tones. "Just don't make too much noise. This is probably the freakiest thing I've ever seen in my life." My brother and I followed him. He kept insisting that we try not to make much noise as we walked along. It was difficult because the ground was covered in dried and decaying leaves. He also had us crouch over and led us to an area overlooking a creek. And that's where I saw the weirdest thing that I'd ever seen in my life up to that point. Of course, keep in mind that I was only 13 years old at the time. There was a huge man walking by the creek. I mean, he may have been the biggest man that I have ever seen in my life. And he was completely naked, but he was covered in matted hair, which practically made up for not having clothes on. Even scarier, he was dragging the corpse of something behind him slowly. I mean, we didn't think it was a human or anything. It was obviously an animal, but it was skinned. And he was just dragging it along, which just seemed weird to us. We all watched as he slowly walked back to the creek. I was trying not to make any noise because I was scared, but this scary and naked behemoth might turn around and see us. And if he did, I had no idea how he would react. And that is why I was tense. Remember how I told you earlier that Pete and my brother liked to do really stupid things when we went out? I just had every feeling that they were going to do something to get this guy's attention. I just remained still as possible, but ready to run faster than both of them if they did something stupid. Fortunately, they didn't. The guy eventually kept walking and was eventually out of view. The whole thing was bizarre. But what really got me was this. Pete and my brother were willing to hit a bull in the balls with a rock. They weren't willing to do anything to get this man's attention. That sort of meant that they were more scared of what we saw that day than they were scared of an angry bull. Let that sink in. Number 3. Dead and breakfast. I had never gone to a bed and breakfast before, but I really wanted to go to this very specific one. There were plenty of stories about it being haunted. I had always wanted to go to a haunted house and spend the night. It was quite a trip for me to go there, and I only went by myself. I wasn't in a relationship at the time or anything like that. Plus I didn't know of anyone who would have wanted to go along with me. At the time, I had to book the room pretty far in advance. I just checked the website now though, and noticed that there isn't nearly as long a wait as it was when I went there. The house that I was going to had several bedrooms. It was also a museum though. Plus it was a historic town, colonial-wise, and there was plenty for me to do when I got there. When I arrived, I was shown to my room. I left my suitcase and stuff in the room. I have to admit to not feeling anything about the room when I was first in it, but I wanted to go out and look around the town. I did that and did quite a bit of exploring before making my way back to the bed and breakfast. The house was very, very old, which was part of its appeal. It wasn't until I was in there by myself at night that I began to feel a little weirded out. I knew the history of the house, and of the room that I was sleeping in, however, so I knew that I was possibly just scaring myself by being in there. Although the room had been fitted with electric lights, I decided to turn them off. I brought some candles because I wanted to feel like I would have felt back in the early days of the house that I was staying in. So I laid in bed that night, trying to read a book. I guess I was trying to distract myself, thinking that I might experience something if I was distracted. However, I kept reading pages of the book without really taking them in. After quite a while, though, nothing had happened in the room. So even though I had spent a decent amount of money for it, it didn't seem like I was going to witness a haunting that night. I eventually decided to go to bed, very disappointed. It was dark, and I'm not sure how long I had been asleep, but I was woken up by hearing the door to my room shut loudly. I immediately woke up and sat straight up in bed. It was dark and I couldn't see anything, yet I could clearly hear something. There were the sounds of footsteps walking lightly in my room. This was so much different than what I had wanted to happen. I wanted to experience some sort of haunting, yes, but I wanted to do it on my terms. I wanted it to happen while I was awake. I didn't want to be woken up by something supernatural. I lay there not really being able to move. It's hard to explain the situation unless you've experienced something like it before. For example, I know that I wanted to be scared, but when I actually was scared, I found that I really didn't want it anymore. So I sat there, tense and afraid, for what seemed like forever, but it was probably just a few moments. And suddenly my bed started moving. It felt like someone put their hands on it and was making it bounce up and down. This quickly brought me out of my little trance. I quickly reached over to the lantern and turned it on. I expected to see something, but there was no one nor nobody there. I didn't even see a shadow of something. But that didn't help. I was still very scared. Also, I couldn't turn the light back off no matter how much I tried. I was too scared, and I knew that I had brought the whole thing upon myself. I didn't get any more sleep that night, and was pretty exhausted the entirety of the following day. But I guess that is what happens when you deliberately spend the night in the room that Lizzie Borden allegedly killed her stepmother in. It's an experience like nothing I'd ever experienced. Hey y'all, Killer Orange Cat here. If you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please feel free to click the subscribe button and bell below, or click the icon of Ichigo the cat that will appear at the end of this closing. Leave me a comment, and share this video with someone you think might enjoy it. If you have an original story you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please email it to the address included in the description. But most importantly, don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.